Director here at the National Museum of Industrial History, and we are thrilled to have you here. This is the 2024 Steel Weekend and Steelworkers Reunion. We've been honoring the contributions of women in iron and steel over the past several days, actually. So this year, we've been celebrating trailblazers from Bethlehem Steel, and we've been exploring what it means to work in the iron and steel industry. And we've also been exploring women's voices and the women's stories surrounding Bethlehem Steel. So from our nation's first female industrialist, Rebecca Lukens, who absolutely revolutionized our idea of what a 19th century industrialist could be, to the women who worked here in this plant. Steel employees weren't the only women who were impacted upon by iron and steel. The wives of steel workers and executives also played a very important role in our community. In fact, steel wives were among the first to block the demolition crews from knocking down historic buildings on Main Street during urban renewal. They made a huge impact in our community, shaping the city and organizations that we know today. We're going to be hearing more today about the spouse of Bethlehem Steel VP William Johnstone, Mildred Johnstone. She was a pioneer in this community in the arts and intellectual pursuits. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carol Shiner Wilson. She's going to be telling us a little bit more about Millie today. Dr. Carol Shiner Wilson retired as the Dean of the College of Academic Life from Muhlenberg College in 2012. She has a Ph.D. in English, a master's in French, and a bachelor's in French, Phi Beta Kappa. Before becoming dean, Carol taught English, French, and women's studies. She's published works through Oxford University Press and the University of Pennsylvania Press. Much of her scholarly work explores historical and cultural context of needlework in women's literature and art. Carol has served the Society of the Arts, SOTA, board, a nonprofit supporting the mission of the Allentown Art Museum. She serves on the board of Muhlenberg College Institute for Jewish Christian Understanding and also a Turning Point of the Lehigh Valley. She was also named Academic Woman of the Year by the Lehigh Valley Association of Academic Women. Carol began exploring the life of Millie Johnstone in the early 1990s. She interviewed Millie's close friends and fellow artists Joe and Margaret Cantini. Joe collaborated with Millie on many of her designs. In 2003, Carol's essay, Art, Life, and Letters, Mildred Johnstone and Feminist Scholarship appeared in the Allentown Art Museum catalog of the artist's work, Poetry in a Steel Mill, Tapestries by Mildred T. Johnstone. We look forward to hearing more about her research today, so please join me in welcoming Carol Shiner Wilson.
Well, thank you, Andrea. And I want to thank Andrea, the staff, the amazing volunteers, and I see my friend Betty Kovac back there. I'm surprised that anybody involved in putting together this extraordinary weekend is able to stand or to sit. This has been exceptional. We've heard the voices of women, black and white women, working class, middle class, public relations, sintering plant. Their stories have come to the surface this weekend, and you'll see from the photographs in the hallway, and also if you have the opportunity, please see the video. These stories have been preserved, so women's history and industrial history will have a richer archive to draw on. This has been extraordinary. So I think that those folks that have put together and who have participated in this deserve the real applause. So let's give them a hand. Okay, all right, now I have got to thank up front Millie Johnstone's niece, Margaret Thomas Poochie Buckholz. She's been with me in this enterprise since the 90s. And I also want to thank Mira Nakashima, who is Millie's goddaughter. She has been very generous in this voyage as well. And to a couple of people here, a shout out to friend and colleague from Lafayette, Diane Shaw, and the textile guru from the Allentown Art Museum, Claire McCree. Thank you all. Millie Johnstone was a remarkable woman. And Anais Nin urged Millie to write her memoir because she had such a fascinating life. But Millie replied, and I'm quoting, "No, I'm too busy living life to write about it." True. She was first-hand witness to many aspects of steelmaking beginning in 1948. She turned those experiences into needlepoint art with titles like Industrial Dollhouse, Electric Arc Furnace, Bride in a Blast Furnace. She was fiercely independent, openly resistant to the confining expectations as the wife of a Bethlehem Steel executive. And yet, interesting, outside the steel, where she didn't feel she had to be quite so oppositional, she mesmerized many people, ordinary people and lots of celebrities, by her quiet grace, her spontaneity, her youthful joy, and her deep friendships. And there were those beautiful blue eyes. She was a liberal who volunteered at Planned Parenthood to educate women about contraception in the mid-1930s. Her close friend and artist Joe Cantini, speaking about the politics of the Johnstones, said, "Those Johnstones were renegades. And you know, I think they voted Democrat." Her core identity was as an artist, and she believed in the transcendent power of art, quote, "to touch the heart, to stir insight, to transform, to heal." She was early on a performing artist who studied modern dance with innovators Ruth St. Denis and Martha Graham. She was herself a groundbreaking visual artist in the 50s and 60s who used needlepoint, historically trivialized as decorative craft, to anticipate the fiber art movement in the 60s and 70s, so now, these days, we will have weaving needlepoint quilts side by side in museum walls with painting. She was also, and this is very important, a spiritual seeker. She incorporated Zen Buddhism, the Japanese tea ceremony, Quakerism, and traditional Judeo-Christianity into her life and art, including a decades-long search to come to terms with the tragic death of her young son after he was mauled to death by an escaped wolf in her first husband's private zoo. Let's do a little pre-1948. She was born in Philadelphia in 1900. Her mother was Quaker, her father was Catholic. Her colorful father was really much more interested in amateur theatrics than he was in tending to the family business. And he did, as Pucci puts it, he ran off with a red-haired actress. And they started a second family in California. He decided to come back east once in a while to visit. And the mother refused to divorce, absolutely, so they were never divorced. In 1920, Millie married Oliver Williams Holton in Red Bank, New Jersey. He was colorful, I think a little bit like Dad, a little reckless. He was the son of a wealthy Catasauqua industrialist. Those of you who know about the Brighton Horseshoe Company, he was heir to that. And he was the one who started the private zoo. He and Millie had two sons, George and Tommy. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, Millie studied dance with Ruth St. Denis and later on Martha Graham, two of the creators of modern dance. And this is when Millie really became first acquainted with Buddhism, because St. Denis sought to capture the music, the movement, the beauty, and the religions of India and Asia, all integrated and embodied. The St. Denis curriculum included Buddhist thought and readings by American transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson. The clothing here, the clothing of what they called the Hindu dance, it allowed Millie to become absorbed into another world. She was always fascinated by fabric and by color. And when she was at the Steel, she deployed clothing as a force of opposition to the business culture of the Steel. In 1927, little Tommy, 2.5 years old, died of wounds inflicted by that escaped wolf. The rest of her life, Millie was working out that pain through her art, through spirituality. She sought to make peace with the wolf. No surprise, Millie and her first husband, divorced. In 1935, Millie married Bill Johnstone, a rising star in Bethlehem Steel in finance and legal affairs. They built Still House, their home on 11 acres on Saucon Valley Road, and later they added a cabin retreat. Son George, who was 14, lived with Bill and Millie, that is her son from the first marriage. And artistic type, he became a brilliant photographer whose works appeared in National Geographic. Not bad. In the 1940s, she studied painting and art history with celebrated artist George Rickey and later Joe Cantini in a very progressive arts program at Muhlenberg College. And then she studied painting at the Barnes Foundation near Philadelphia. 1944, a very significant meeting, very significant. She met George Nakashima, his 2.5-year-old daughter Mira, and wife Marion in a New Hope bookstore. This was significant for many reasons. Now, they were living in a tent at that time. The family had just relocated from an internment camp in Idaho. As Mira says appropriately, where we were incarcerated. George, he was US born. He had a master's degree in architecture from MIT. He had experience in Europe and Asia with top architectural firms, but he wound up in Idaho. Millie found in him a like-minded spiritual seeker who had lived on an ashram in India for 2 years. He was baptized Catholic. He practiced Zen. Like Millie, very ecumenical in his approach to spirituality. And he infused that spirituality in his art, in his woodworking. In fact, his memoir is called The Soul of a Tree. The Soul of a Tree. Millie was enthusiastic about his exquisitely crafted furniture. She was an early adopter, an early client, and she helped him build his business. So today, most of us in this room can't afford that furniture. In 1948, she took that historic tour of the blast furnace, and steelmaking became her inspiration and her muse. In a 2-year period there was an explosion of activity. She was working on needlepoints constantly, several at a time, and she was just so dynamically engaged. One of the most dramatic, I think, is this little man, what now? Red, it's not quite as vivid because of the light, but the red is so vivid in the original. Come to the museum to see it sometime. So you have here the vibrant red of you see the iconic blast furnace on the left, and just imagine that the blazing fire, 2,000 degrees plus in that blast furnace. And you have here a brilliant red sunset. So you have this coming together of nature and industry. And of course, at that time, and from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was this real concern that industry would drive out nature and humankind's association with nature. So you have power, the power of industry and the power of nature. Do you see the diminutive figure there? That's Bill. He looks really solitary, doesn't he? So she said that he looked like a very lonely figure, alone, she said, with the risk of decision making. The risk of decision making. This is needlepoint. This is a dramatic new way of working with serious subjects. Her research, was she serious about her research? Well, and she would always go on site. She would talk to those workers. She would talk to the supervisors. She pestered them with questions right and left. What is this? What does it do? Why? All of that. And then she also sat down, in addition to lots of visits to steelmaking sites, she sat down with photographs, with magazine articles, everything. And she pieced together collages that would look kind of abstract. Collages, and then she would work initially with a collaborator was a Chilean surrealist named Pablo Bouchard. But then most of her work was with her dear friend and artist Joe Cantini. And what these people did is they would take a look at her collages, and then artist and designer would collaborate on what that design would look like. And that's the design that went on the canvas. But it was never static. Millie was always modifying the design, using different colors. As she said, I rip as much as I sew. Now her work is very eclectic. Certainly she drew on modernism. Abstraction, experimentation with shapes, lines, and the emotion and the immediacy of color. Cubism, surrealism, South American indigenous art, even medieval art like the Bayeux tapestry or the Renaissance unicorn tapestries, and images from Eastern religions and the Bible. The moods from heroic to meditative, strange sometimes, and playful. Her work was everywhere. Well, imagine where her studio is. Her studio is her lap. And so she took this around the world because Bill was on business trips a lot. So she could take her work, and she was constantly stitching. People write about how she always had her needle points on her lap. She was working constantly. So, didn't matter. We have pictures of her in a camel market in Marrakesh. She's doing her needlepoint. By the Bayeux tapestry, she's doing her needlepoint. And on and on and on. Now the initial public narratives reinforced domesticity, claiming that Johnstone's needlepoints were, quote, in a long continuum of women's work celebrating a husband's accomplishments. Most notable, Queen Matilda, stitching the conquests of William the Conqueror in, you know the date, 1066, end quote. Well, while a bit flattered about the comparison to Queen Matilda, She insisted that this was not something that was subservient to her husband. Rather, she saw that her artistic vision complemented his vision in business. And perhaps even more, she was there to use that artistic imagination to temper what she found to be intense rationality of the steel business. Now, in an era when women purchased pre-printed patterns, she urged women to look around them, see something or someone that would inspire your inspiration to do your design of something that you are interested in and something, and get into that imaginative world. And by the way, some of you may remember that the football player Roosevelt Grier, in 1973, he wrote a little book called Needlework for Men. And you know, it's kind of fun to look at. And of course, I guess today, pre-printed, those who are interested in Taylor Swift can get a whole set of needlepoints to work for on Swifties stuff. 1940s and through the 60s. She was a pioneer in fiber art. Now, in 1948, the needle still signified a 19th century ideology, middle-class ideology of domesticity that asserted a woman should be anchored in her home and sewing, knitting, whatever, for her family. That's it. You know, don't go out and try to write a novel. You know, don't go out and try to paint anything. Stay home. And needlework was considered craft, decorative, utilitarian. Because after all, the true domain supposedly was painting and sculpture, and that's what the guys did. Now today, as I said before, you can go to the Allentown Art Museum, you can go to MoMA, you can go to a lot of places, and you will see weaving next to painting. Her close friend and weaver Lenore Tawney was also a pioneer, but frankly a lot more famous than Mildred. If you'll take a look, those probably look familiar. Two descendants of Lenore Tawney and that whole fiber art movement. You have here on the left the monumental dinner party by Judy Chicago, stitched where it celebrates at the dinner table 39 women important in history, including Sojourner Truth and Georgia O'Keeffe and others. And then here we have a narrative quilt by Faith Ringgold. And her quilts, which she saw as so important to African American culture, told the story of the joys, of the sorrows, of the pains, of the liberation of African American life. Oops. Yeah, Alice? We're gonna go to, we need to go to Alice, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad she's here and paying attention, because I'm not. Okay. This needlepoint was awarded first prize in the miscellaneous category by the American Craftsmen's Educational Council in 1953, still considered craft. And in a traveling show around the country, it went to major museums, including the Brooklyn Museum, San Francisco, the Art Institute in Chicago, all over the place. Now, this is kind of fun. Boy, we have a solitary figure here, very different from Little Man What Now. So you have the pink-tailed, it's Millie. It's a surrogate for Millie. And there she is, like Alice in Wonderland, curiouser and curiouser. And she's at the bottom of this spiral staircase that takes the eye way up to the sky. And here she is, she's embarking on this adventure of what's going on in this amazing place, these steel mills. Let's hear what Millie wrote in reaction to the kaleidoscope of colors, shapes, sounds, and high temperatures in 1948. She was transfixed. Quote, drawn into the percussive beat of its tensions and power, the primordial surge of production, dust catchers, skip cars, sawtoothed roofs, or a blast furnace against a red sky. The visual excitement of turning hot metal into cold steel, suggesting infinite possibilities for working in thread. Fluorescent red for the burning crackle of scrap iron, or yellow angora for poured steel. The magic mood of men in masks pushing levers, switches, and buttons. The colors and the compositions of the needlepoints were dictated by the industry, its dissonance, texture, and drama. By the symbolic forms of machinery in relation to men, poetry in a steel mill. And I do have, this is the catalog from the 2003 show at the Allentown Art Museum of Millie's work, and it's called Poetry in a Steel Mill. So if you want to take a look at that afterwards, and there are copies, I think the museum is out of their copies here, but the Allentown Art Museum does have wonderful copies. And Allentown Art Museum is a wonderful place too. Okay. Industrial dollhouse, a needlepoint. Think of the title. The juxtaposition, the industrial part, masculine industry, heat, sweat, muscle, and a young girl's dollhouse. So Millie, the young girl, can manipulate the doll's house. So what she does is she lets imagination in. Again, she just really worked against what she saw as intense rationality of the business of steelmaking. She domesticates the scene. She does not emasculate the scene. She domesticates the scene. Now, it was not public, but in private writings, she was very, and I'm sure to her friends, she was really direct about what we could call the hostility to the steel, but it was to the business part of steel, those business executives. Quote, what she wanted to do was, quote, to discover a way of living with the steel industry rather than against it, end quote. So here she's, this artist and liberal kind of dropped into the world in 1935, and of course the years thereafter, dropped into this world of conservative power. After all, Bethlehem Steel was king. The war effort, building ships to protect the nation, it was good business and patriotic. Building skyscrapers and bridges all around the country. And then in the post-war era, after all, this is after World War II, they're turning their focus to steel making for consumer products. And if you go right across that hallway, you will see some of those products, refrigerators and so forth, in the display here. But she was very, very frustrated with those powerful men, with those kings of industry. And certainly labor and management, that was a man's world, absolutely hierarchical and patriarchal. And that had implications, of course, for gender roles. So a wife took her status from her husband's position, and her behavior was critical in his advancement or decline. Now, that wasn't just Bethlehem Steel, that was business across the country, and this hierarchical, patriarchal thing also in the military. So it was not unusual in the 50s to see that. And it's interesting, the woman would be deferred to or expected to defer to another woman, or certainly to the husband, according to the position in the hierarchy. There was an unwritten code of conservative behavior and dress. Now, one of my wonderful contacts said this. He said, you know, with Millie Johnstone, the Bethlehem Steel executive wives were a stable full of thoroughbred fillies. Millie was a zebra, and she didn't care. Well, yes, that's true. Great quotation. Now, it probably got around, oh hell, of course it got around, that Millie swam in the nude. Now, in the Johnstone pool. She didn't go over to Saucon Valley, which was just next door, and swim there, okay. It also got around, and in fact, people saw her. She loved to get on her bicycle and just go riding, and with her long hair in the wind flowing behind her, she was quite a sight to behold, and often if she had guests, they'd be trying to catch up with her. She had a particular animus for Chairman Arthur Homer and his wife. Speculation later, maybe. Now, I hate this term, but I'm going to use it. Millie weaponized fashion in social situations, especially the parties that she detested. The sea, quote, sea of black dresses with pearls, always that black, end quote. She, on the other hand, was typically dressed in, and one of her favorite outfits, and she records it and other people record it as well, was a flowing, quote, chartreuse dress with a vibrant Siamese blue scarf. I had to check on Google, and Siamese blue is a color. I wouldn't have known otherwise. She loved bright colors. She loved flowing fabric. And when she visited Matisse, she made sure that she wore a flowing dress with Matisse bright colors. Now, just as one example, there are many, but one example, at a business cocktail party in San Francisco, it was hosted by Bethlehem Steel for their international partners, senior executives. And Millie wrote that the party was put on by the chairman of the board, and she put it in quotes, B-O-R-E-D. That's Millie. So she said, she caught the eye. Two women caught one another's eye in this sea of black dresses. They were both colorful. And so they got together and they were talking, and it turned out that this woman was Swedish, and she was on the board of the Swedish Arts and Crafts Society. No surprise. In fact, Millie said to her initially as they met, "Do you weave or write?" Because she saw there was another artist there. Well, they chatted on, and they were interrupted by the Bethlehem Steel hostess, who told Millie, and I'm quoting from Millie's letter, "not to be so provincial as to just talk with one guest, but to go over and be with those men in the circle," end quote. Well, eventually she did that, biting her tongue all the way, I expect. What about Bill? What about Bill in all of this? She appreciated from the very beginning that he accepted who she was and who her son was, because they were both very inclined toward the arts and they were unconventional. She was his confidant. He shared frustrations from work. He rehearsed speeches as she needleworked. She was proud of his expertise and leadership in the company and in the community. But she also saw him as apart from the other executives. She really did compartmentalize. I think that's how she rationalized all of this. He wasn't like them, she felt. She worried terribly about his health, including stress leading to cardiac issues. Well, the guy was a workaholic. I mean, he worked hard and he worked smart, but I don't think that was the Steel's fault. It's kind of who he was. And also he had incessant problems with asthma, caused by the relentless dust from cement manufacturing. We need to remember there was also cement manufacturing in the valley. And as a retired pulmonologist friend who was around in those days said, oh yes, it was called Cement Dust Valley. So she saw him as a little boy to be protected. Relationships outside the steel, an incredibly large range. And you have here in the south of France, you have some celebrities. Billy Michael is on the right. He's the photographer, a German photographer. Fascinating story that he had. And so she had friends in the arts world, certainly in the world of dance, Martha Graham, Ruth St. Denis, Jerome Robbins. There were Japanese heritage artists, ceramicist Toshiko Takaizu, fiber artist Alice Parrott, architect Philip Johnson, writers, I mean, on and on and on. And many, many friends through Zen and through the Japanese tea ceremony. And at one point, the Dalai Lama came to her New York apartment. She was quite advanced in years. And she, in her little tea room, she offered the Dalai Lama tea. And it's interesting, the niece Poochie was there also. And Millie had told her ahead of time, now wear no jewelry, be very respectful, and in fact, be silent. So, she also had close acquaintances at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, especially historian E.A. Lowe. Lots of interaction. He was in Bethlehem for the Bach choir, for example, at her house frequently. Lots of interaction. And through him, she met and talked with some regularity Albert Einstein. She loved young people, and young people loved her, especially her dear niece, Mira, and her daughter-in-law, Lo Holton. She was, as they have said, non-judgmental. She taught them dance, Japanese tea ceremony, and needlepoint. She adored the Cantini family, Joe and Quaker wife Margaret, and their artistic boys, David and Piero. They lived just down the creek from the Johnstone estate in what's now, it was Way Hill Farms. So let's wrap up a little bit now with some comments about needlepoints that directly explore existential issues, personal and universal, especially suffering and how to cope. So you have Buddha in a blast furnace, and then bride in a blast furnace, and then there's a detail of the bride. So you'll notice these figures are in intense heat. We're talking 2,000 degrees plus. But they look so calm. They look so calm. And why? I mean, I think she's beautiful. Take a look at the, isosceles triangles and that beautifully shaped round head. In Buddhism, the first noble truth is that suffering is fundamental in life. Suffering, but also the impermanence of objects, the impermanence of experiences, and so forth. So certainly one of the key things for Millie was the death of her child. And So in coping, we can go to the pink nude, I think now. Yeah. What we have here is, I think, a really good example of where the actual then became metaphor and inspiration for her art and for her life, because this is Millie nude. I mean, it's her surrogate. It's a self-portrait. And what happened is, what was the actual that was the base? In a strip mill one day, Millie asked the foreman why these red-hot ingots were lowered into a soaking pit. His reply, quote, "To give them an even heat and make them more pliable for reshaping in the rolling mill," end quote. So this portrait embraces the understanding that she and we are perhaps better off in life in responding to the trials by becoming more pliable, by letting go of anger, and fear and anger, and not trying to control everything, because life does not welcome trying to be controlled, because it cannot be controlled. So, and I think that forgiveness, opening up to life rather than trying to control it, and suffering, concept consistent with Buddhism and with Christianity, suffering and grace. She engaged in decades of practicing Zen meditation, and she was in fact known as the Dharma Mother at the New York Zendo, which she and Bill Johnstone helped found. And by the way, once she got beyond, if you will, the steel as her subject, as her muse, she went very much into calligraphy, she did lots of stitched mandalas, like the tea mandala, the family mandala, and so forth. So she turned her life and her art really more into Eastern spirituality. So the Japanese tea ceremony, based in part on ancient Zen culture, this aesthetic ritual has prescribed objects, a bowl, a tea whisk, and so forth, and slow, prescribed steps to encourage attention to detail and appreciation, slowing it down. I mean, now you can go sign up for a course in mindfulness, at LVHN. Well, they were sort of doing this thousands of years ago. And as one scholar has put it, quote, "Simplicity, reverence, serenity," because it's very social, "courteous and compassionate behavior toward others, finding beauty in the everyday," end quote. She narrated the ceremony at the 1964 World's Fair in the Japanese Pavilion, and in countless schools and churches and synagogues, because she was so enthusiastic about the Japanese tea ceremony. And once you get an enthusiastic Millie Johnstone, she will go that extra mile. So she was enthusiastic about George Nakashima furniture. Zoom, she just went for it. She was very enthusiastic about the Bach choir. She was relentless in inviting people, hosting people, and so forth, because she felt it was so valuable. And this was true about the Japanese tea ceremony as well. And in 1971, she narrated the tea ceremony, which was presented by tea master Hisashi Yamada at the dedication of the Japanese garden at the Bethlehem City Center, just south of the library. Peaceable Kingdom. Well, that is the board of directors, and it looks suspiciously like the Last Supper. Now, their faces, I mean, it's irreverent and it's irreverent, but let me continue. You do have the directors, and they look fairly calm. The middle, in the position of Christ, is Arthur Homer. Oh gracious, and who is that mustached gentleman 5 slots from the right? It's Bill Johnstone. So what she has done here is to take industry and try to incorporate it into nature. And it is trying to seek peace in a world of anxieties. And you know what the anxieties there were? The Cold War. We were in the middle of the Cold War. There was this fear of annihilation in a nuclear attack. And there was this awful, awful legacy and knowledge of the Holocaust. So she's trying to, it's a desire for peace. And we have then little Tommy. Now, peaceable kingdom should be a familiar term to a lot of you. And it comes from, the concept comes from the book of Isaiah. The wolf, the wolf also shall lie down with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion together, and a little child shall lead them. The little child, of course, it is little Tommy. So Millie's needlepoint responds to images from over 60 paintings by Quaker, there's a Quaker theme again, Quaker preacher Edward Hicks about the desire for peace. You know, think about today. We also, I think all of us have that desire for peace, that the wolf and the lamb shall lie down together. So Millie used detail from Hicks's paintings, and he did over 60. They varied some, but not a lot. She wrote in 1979, now remember she's almost 80 years old at this point. She wrote what was called a tone poem called Brother Wolf. It was written, Tommy, her son Tommy, long gone, but not too much in the past. Her son George had died on a photographic assignment for Lindblad in China. I think he was in his 50s. So she writes this tone poem for her little grandson, also named Tommy. And I hope I can put this well enough, but even though the subject is about the death of the first little Tommy, it incorporates the story of St. Francis, taming a wolf. It is so spiritual and so gentle that it does not feel gruesome. It's really a beautiful, beautiful piece. And so what she really does in this work, it embraces understanding. She makes peace with the wolf. Well, wait a minute, what's the wolf? Yeah, it's the literal wolf, but it's a metaphorical wolf. It's the wolf that we see in international conflict. It's the wolf that we see when anybody subjugates anybody else to pain or to suffering. She also saw, she was very honest, she also saw the wolf in herself. And that she had been angry with the steel, with the executives of the steel. The guys on, the cast floor and all that, they were exempt. They were exempt. She felt real respect and real awe for them. So I admire that self-scrutiny and that honesty. and I admire her work. So who was Millie Johnstone? I think, like a lot of us, very complex individual. Everything, the spiritual seeker, the rebellious executive wife. So I hope that you've gotten some impressions, and probably some conflicting impressions too, because I think that's what we all are. So there is going to be a question and answer period after I show credits. I'll be honest, I'd be very happy to answer questions, but I also sincerely hope, because so many of you have so many areas that you know so much better than I do, that relate to the art, or the Japanese tea ceremony, or Bethlehem steel, or whatever. I would love to hear from you, and that's very, very sincere. So let me give the thanks, if we could. Millie's family and friends. To the far right, you have a young Poochie on the estate with Millie, also a young Millie. In the middle, you have the Cantinis, very musical, very visual arts people. So this is a little ensemble playing the flute, recorder. And then this is inside the cabin. And on the left, you have a, I think, darn good looking George, her son, and Bill and Millie. And then, oh my gosh, I've been so lucky. Archives people, including in MIH, Allentown Art Museum, Muhlenberg College, the Morgan in New York, the Nakashima Foundation for Peace, archives, on and on and on and on. And in each archives, really generous people saying, oh, you've got an interesting topic, let's see what we have and if we can help you. And then my last thank you slide. From A to Z, you will notice, these are individuals who, for a variety of reasons, have talked to me over the past couple of years to say, oh my gosh, you know, I was interviewed at the Johnstone's home to be a member of the Saucon Valley Country Club. Oh yes, I was just a little girl, and my mom took me several times to the cabin where I saw Millie Johnstone do her needlepoints. I mean, on and on and on and on. Everybody has something that they've contributed to me. So I have business cards, so for anybody who also wants to continue the conversation and so forth, please make sure that you pick up a business card, and my email is there. And then let's go back to Millie. There she is, working on Little Man What Now. And look at her dress, look at that skirt. It's her niece still has it and has sent me a picture of it, and it's a vibrant red, very colorful designs. It's Millie. I mean, today I'm in something flowing and colorful in celebration of Millie Johnstone. So thank you very much. So, questions or comments? Oh, come on, you don't look like that shy a group. Oh, I should have known this one.
Carol, you kept talking about her needlepoint.
Yes.
And there was a picture of her with the Bayeux tapestries. Did she really do the Bayeux tapestries in needlepoint, or did she try to do the needlework like the Bayeux?
No, that was simply I'm sorry. No, she never tried to duplicate the Bayeux tapestry. There is a photograph of her in that huge room where they used to have the Bayeux tapestry. Now it's all, climate controlled and so forth. No, but she did. What is so interesting, I've remarked, and like I just discovered this a couple of years ago, there is the hand of God, which is one aspect of the Bayeux tapestry that she found particularly fascinating, but she never tried to duplicate it. She was fresh, new designs of her own. But she did admire, I mean, that thing is, what, 144 feet long or something like that. She admired the crafting of that. Now, it's kind of, now it's not attributed to Queen Matilda anymore, and it's not called a tapestry. It's really an embroidery, and it was really commissioned by, I think it was William's uncle, who was a bishop in Bayeux. So no, she did her designs fresh from her imagination. But thank you. Yes.
Oh, I just. Thanks. I'm dressed as Rebecca Lucas, in case you're wondering. But anyway, I'm from Coatesville, the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum. But it's funny, I heard about her through people in Coatesville, but I could see how her reputation was because they said, oh yeah, she's an artist. And she had the audacity to do painting, they said painting or tapestry with the Bethlehem executives as, copying Da Vinci's Last Supper. And that's the only thing they focused on. So it's sort of funny that this is, that I was told that, and that, of course I see it's only one part of that painting, and it's not, but they just remember that Bethlehem, took over Luke and Steel at one point, so they probably didn't like Bethlehem anyway. So, but they thought that was, even if they hadn't met her before, it continued on her reputation.
Her reputation was wide and long, and yeah, her reputation was widespread, and part of it was she was a rebel, and as my contact said, she was a zebra, and she didn't care. So she was really an audacious woman, and she was an artist. And I think part of what, I get this over and over in her letters and other things, is just the intense arrogance, rationality, kings. I mean, these executives were consistently in the 1950s. You take a look at the reports in magazines of top salaries in the country. Inevitably, anyway, what I've looked at in the 50s, you will have, if you say there's, you'll say there's a ranking, and you've got 10 of the top executive salaries in the country. Bethlehem Steel will probably be 7 out of those 10 of executives in the entire country. And she really, it just drove her crazy. And I do think she was lucky to have Bill. And he really appreciated her, understood her, and I think he was better at what he did. By the way, there is a plaque in his honor from 1968 in the rotunda in the the Bethlehem city center, and it talks about another presentation. I actually showed the plaque, but it talks about his combination of artistic spirit and pragmatism. Well, I'm sure that, at home at night, they were talking about these kinds of things. And I do think that there was a lot of give and take there. And I think she was a force to be dealt with. But let's face it, he continued to make good progress. He became a director. But I'm sure it wasn't easy because Millie was Millie. She was that zebra. Now, I read one source, and I want to get corroboration on this, but one source said, he was being considered as the chairman of the whole kit and caboodle, but they thought it might impede Millie's exuberance. No kidding. Now, whether or not he was really considered for that top position, but I mean, he was a director, and his last position was chairman of finance. So what a story. It's kind of fun. Yes, Claire.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was curious about whether was Millie raised Quaker, or did she identify as Quaker at any point during her adult life?
Wonderful question. Kind of a mixed story. Her mother was intensely Quaker, and her sister was intensely Quaker. Even, and I don't know, Joe Cantini, one of his stories was that the sister said, you know, would thee have a martini? So, I don't know, it's a nice story, but Joe said it. Millie was not baptized to anything until she was 10, and then she was baptized Episcopalian when the family had moved to New Jersey. But she did, and it's very clear in her relationships, including with Margaret Cantini, who was Quaker, and other spiritual seekers, she did interact and she did appreciate the Quaker culture. So she did not self-identify as Quaker, but then she didn't self-identify, that I've seen, as anything except a seeker with something like the Buddhism. But the spirituality of it, she respected that culture, and certainly she saw something like the Hicks painting as fundamental to what she believed. But no, that's a very good question. Yes. Oh, sorry. Gotta give this guy that.
It sounds like she produced an awful lot of work. So how vast is it? Was it? And where is it all?
I wish she had produced a vast amount of work. Much of what is readily available is in the Allentown Art Museum, and Claire McCree is here. She is the textile guru of the Allentown Art Museum. And so there are several of the needlepoints there. But much of the rest of the work is in family and friend locations. And there's a story, actually, of one needlepoint that went missing and one that got discovered. I mean, as I'm doing all of this. It was a cousin by divorce, as I call him. He was a Swarthmore president, but he was related to Millie, Millie's first husband. But anyway, they considered one another cousins. And he had lent, while he was living, he had lent Bride in the Blast Furnace and Peaceable Kingdom to the Allentown Art Museum for this show. At his death in 2020, his estate gave Bride in the Blast Furnace to the Art Museum. Bless their hearts. Peaceable Kingdom went missing. So we've really been trying through the family, through dealers who were working with the estate and so forth. So that's a mystery I would like to solve. And the other thing, though, you lose one. You don't want to lose any. And then you gain one. And then the other one, and I had seen pictures of it. Actually, I think it's in here as well. There was one done in 1949 to celebrate the opening of a library at Bethlehem Steel. Well, that one kind of went missing, and then lo and behold, it turned up. And in fact, we are really, really fortunate that Andrea Zaya has that needlepoint. So with totally legitimate way of getting it. Don't worry, we don't have any provenance police here, don't worry. But part of what I have to do in my research is to make sure that I identify as much as there is. I regret to say, because she did not promote herself as an artist for hire, if you will. I mean, Lenore Tawney, she had her studio in New York, she did all of her crafts and so forth, her art, and she presented herself as an artist on the market. Millie Johnstone did not. So what we have tends to be, I mean, the Allentown Art Museum has the largest collection, and we're so lucky there. And also a wonderful cape done by Alice Parrott that was given by Mira Nakashima to the art museum. Mira Nakashima and Pushy Buckholz have been both very generous with their information and with some of the artifacts for the art museum. So one of the things I might mention too is that the art museum, and when I say the art museum, I mean the Allentown Art Museum, has what I call kind of the Pennsylvania industrial corner. So you have that wonderful mural, if you haven't seen it, please go see it, by Franz Klein of Lehighton. And this is kind of Franz Klein before he got super abstract and so forth. It's magnificent. You've got the territory, you've got these little houses on a hill, you've got the locomotives going by, so you've got the industry there, you've got daily life there, you've got a little kid flying a kite, you've got a little aerodrome. It's amazing, and it's big. And adjacent to that, depending on the rotation, is you have had Millie Johnstone needlepoints there. Now, right now, there are some wonderful prints from coal country, including Michael Gallagher. Wonderful things. But there will be, in the next rotation, there will be a Mildred Johnstone back on. Do we know which one yet, Claire?
We have not decided.
Okay, so stay tuned. But the thing is, pretty much, she's on display. What I love that the museum is doing, of course, when you've got works on paper and you've got things that are, fabric, textiles, they've got to rotate them out to protect them. They do. So I wish I had a Millie Johnstone. Darn it. So, yes.
What took her to New York, and where did she die? Did she come back to the Valley, still have the same property? And second part, did she ever sell her artistic designs?
Good questions. I may not remember all the parts, you're gonna have to remind me. New York. Bethlehem Steel executives typically had a place in New York. Now, the really conventional ones were like in the Waldorf Astoria. Millie thought that was a real bore. So, in, I don't remember the date, late 60s, early 70s, there was this, according to the Wall Street Journal, the edgy new place to live. And it was the UN Plaza buildings. There were two buildings. And they talked about the glass, ceiling to floor, the glass, the great views. And folks like, there was a Rockefeller there, Johnny Carson. And if I got from the niece dirty stories about Johnny Carson and what a pain in the neck he was, but anyway. So they had one of the Koch brothers, so they had executives and artists living there, Truman Capote. And Millie, of course, that's where she would be, because that was the happening, edgy place. And there's actually an article in the New York Times that talks about that building and has pictures of Millie's place. She was in the New York Times for another, essay about cool women in New York. So they lived in New York, had a place in New York quite a while. Now he retired in 1967. They kept their Saucon Valley property. and then in 1972 sold that property. But they kept an interest, a lifetime interest, in the area where the cabin is. And I don't know, is Nancy Allen here? I only met her by, anyway, she's the real estate agent. When I got in touch with her, she said, oh yeah, I know that property. I've sold it 3 times in the past 50 years. I said, I think I hit the right woman. So, they were back and forth, and she was into New York life, full blown. She never, to my knowledge, she never sold any of her work. I would be very surprised if she did. Very surprised if she did. Did I get everything? Oh, where did she die? New York City. And it's interesting, if you are inclined to go to the Niski Hill Cemetery, and you know where Eugene Grace's huge monument is? Well, if you go behind, you will find 2 very simple stones, flat stones. One is Bill Johnstone's. He actually died in St. Luke's Hospital here in 1983. He came back for treatment. And the other is Millie Johnstone's. Now, and I need to verify this, but my understanding is that half of their ashes, half of his, half of hers, are buried here in Bethlehem. And that the other half are buried at an upstate New York monastery, a Zen Buddhist monastery, which they also helped found and fund. But that piece I have to verify yet. No, good questions. Gosh, lots of good questions. Don't I have any comments from anybody? Anything burning? Anything? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Wow. You've been wonderful. Thank you. Thanks very, very much.